National Cabinet has agreed in principle to new vaccination targets, which will dictate the gradual easing of restrictions across the country and the reopening of the economy. 70% of the eligible adult population will need to have received 2 vaccine doses before the nation moves to the next stage. Lockdowns will become less likely, however there's no firm timeframe. We'll cross to political reporter Matthew Doran in a moment, but first a look at the details.
The Prime Minister illuminating Australia's path back to normality.
Every single jab, every single vaccine will take us closer to achieving each of these steps.
Scott Morrison, premiers and chief ministers accepting modelling from the renowned Doherty Institute in Melbourne, noting no state or territory can be left behind.
It's not something that any one government, any one vaccination clinic, any one Australian can achieve on their own.
The nation's currently still in the first phase of a 4-stage plan towards a new normal. Social restrictions like lockdowns currently seen in Sydney still the norm when dealing with outbreaks. The second stage will kick in when 70% of the eligible population has received 2 doses of a coronavirus vaccine. Lockdowns will be less likely, but still needed at times. Stage 3 begins when there's 80% vaccination, there'll be no lockdowns, and vaccinated Australians will be allowed to come home without restrictions. Exactly when the nation hits those targets, not set in stone.
The timelines are now in the hands of all Australians, together with state and territory governments and the federal government. We get there when we get there, and I hope we get there as soon as we possibly can.
Putting figures on the next steps to reopening will help guide those living within Fortress Australia. Vaccination remains the key, and for those overseas, they'll also be reliant on the actions of others. One of Australia's nearest neighbours grappling with the virus still raging out of control. This week, Indonesia marked 2,000 daily deaths from COVID-19 for the first time, prompting a warning from the Australian Embassy in Jakarta.
If you're an Australian in Indonesia and you want to return home,
you need to register now.
Officials scrambling to organise repatriation flights for the almost 800 Australians in Indonesia registered as wanting to come home. One such flight from Bali is imminent.
It's subject to final approvals processes.
There are more than 38,500 Australians still stuck overseas and registered as wanting to return. But 6,000 have told officials they don't wish to come home until towards the end of the year. 4,500 are considered vulnerable, experiencing things such as financial strife or with underlying health conditions.
We're also working in September on flights from other additional capitals.
Finding them spots in quarantine, however.
We are urgently looking at alternative quarantine facilities and bringing online those capabilities as soon as possible.
A process all tied to the willingness of Australians to roll up their sleeves. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
And Matt Doran joins us. Matt, what does this mean about when Australia can be out of lockdowns?
Jess, good evening. This does give the nation something to strive for, I guess you could say. It does ensure that we know exactly what vaccination rates will be needed to avoid the harshest restrictions that are put in place across the country, and it could be seen as something of an enticement for people to roll up their sleeves and get those vaccinations. But of course, that is also predicated on the issue of having access to vaccines. Over the next couple of months, as more vaccine doses arrive in Australia, particularly those which are imported, like the Pfizer and Moderna shots, that will also have an impact on how quickly we can achieve those targets. The Prime Minister and the Premiers and Chief Ministers were very keen not to put timeframes on this. That does give the leaders some political wriggle room if it is a situation where achieving these targets are delayed. And it is also worth pointing out that there is something of a double trigger to achieving these targets. Not only does there need to be a national average of people being vaccinated, but also in any state and territory, they too need to, by themselves, achieve those targets too. That will ensure that they're, first of all, not getting left behind, but also that people aren't jumping the gun and releasing some sort of restrictions before it is indeed most appropriate to do so. Jess?
Matt Doran reporting from Canberra.